Hi, my name is Barbara, and this is my channel, Coffee for a Dream. I wanted to start this channel to document my recent conversion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. I have been baptized for a week today, so I was baptized on August 17th, 2025. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey and hopefully if there's someone who's looking to convert, if they're looking at the church and or maybe they're just curious, I thought that this would be just a really good way to provide a little bit of information from a first person perspective. So I've known about the church for a very long time. My first contact with someone from the church was when I was about 13. And then from the ages of 14 to 18, I went to school with a lot of Mormons. So I had some interaction with them, but I generally didn't have that much information. This was before, ChatGPT. It wasn't, Google was still in its infancy. And there's just not a whole lot of information around it. I remember when I was younger, I would see commercials for the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on TV, and I just always thought it was really interesting that they would give you a Book of Mormon for free. So at the time, I always wanted to call, but 13 years old, I didn't really think I should be calling anyone for anything, so I just kind of left it. And when I was 18, one of the churches or the temple in my area had just been renovated and they were opening it to visitors. So normally the temples, you're not allowed to go in unless you're a full member of the church. And this like fellow student, she was a friend of mine. She had a picture of the temple in her locker, and the temples, if you've never seen pictures or if you've never seen one, they're beautiful. They're really, really beautiful buildings. And she showed me this picture of the temple, and I said to her, "Wow, that's really beautiful. I would really love to see it someday." And she just said, "Well, you can't because only members can go inside unless you want to convert." And it just struck me as so odd. I wasn't expecting that reaction, so I didn't really know what to do with that at the time. I was, I think, 17 or 18, and I just kind of let it sit. As a kid, I was pretty pious, and I was a pretty obedient kid. I was really, they would call me goody two shoes, and I just throughout the course of my life, especially I think once I got into middle school, the peer pressure really started to kick in. And it wasn't cool to be such a goody goody. It wasn't cool to not want to curse. It wasn't cool for this. It wasn't cool for that. And I already started getting the messages of being beautiful is better, being sexy is better, and that just kind of started me on this journey to essentially want to change my essence, wanted to change who I was, and I went down that path, and it just spiraled um, for decades essentially. And I feel like I was the only person in my family that was pious, and there was no real reason why I was religious. I didn't really have much of a religious upbringing, but it just felt right. And I just ended up abandoning that. I finally really did abandon it in my maybe my late 20s completely. I just didn't really go to church. I was never anti-theist, but I did start to believe in the rhetoric that to believe in God or to believe in a church was to be a sheep. And now as a Christian and as a Mormon, I even though I do kind of see it as like we really are like sheep, but not in the same way as I did before. Before it was a very negative connotation, as in like you don't have your own thoughts, you don't, you have no independence, and I started to criticize people who believed so blindly in the church and who just followed it without any seeming um, concern for, actually questioning anything. And at the same time that all of this was happening, I was still spiraling downwards. I was still doing things that I should not have been doing because they were damaging either to myself or to others. And I just I just ended up very depressed with a lot of anxiety. I was taking an absurd amount of antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. And I was pleading with my therapist or my psychiatrist at this point, saying, well, what's the next step? Because my dosages were already so high that I couldn't imagine what more she could do. She had already tried to put me on a different antidepressant, and it just didn't work. It just I couldn't adapt to it. It made me feel really sick all the time, and I think that was kind of my wake up call. So I switched jobs at that point, and I switched pretty much knowing that it was my last attempt. It was the third company that I would be working at, and I just already knew that corporate life wasn't for me. And finally, I ended up leaving that last job, and I took that opportunity to go find myself in a way. And it was a really hard, really long journey. It took me about 2 years, and it was just exhausting. As I'm not going to go into the details right now, but it was a really, really, really difficult journey. I did learn a lot about myself, and um, finally, this was at the end of like around 2003. I started to really get into New Age spirituality. A lot of the things that I was experiencing started to align, and it was kind of almost by chance. Like I was starting to feel this questioning of my own identity and what it meant, and I was kind of struggling with this on my own. I wasn't really talking to anyone about it. I was very isolated from everyone at this point. And when I realized that there was this thing called, spirituality, New Age, that they were talking about the same concepts, it really drew me in. And so I started to, wanna learn more. But I got to a point where I just hit a wall. Like I felt, this is not really doing anything for me. It felt heavy, it felt burdensome because there's a lot of this talk of you doing things for yourself, but a lot of like the manifesting, but a lot of the manifesting really, I don't want to say it sounded manipulative, but in some ways it did. And so I got really, I got really, I guess, frustrated that I couldn't really move forward with it. And then I got to a point where I kept hearing people telling me, you should go to church, you should go to church. And so finally, I made the decision and I went to church. And it was an evangelical church. And as I sat in the service, I felt like this is what I had been waiting for. I just kind of realized, what, this was the place that I needed to be. And so I was very uplifted. I was very positive for a while that, I'd found my church, and, it would just take me a little bit of time to be able to get to know the members and to, really feel a sense of belonging because I'm painfully shy. I'm so, so shy. And so I insisted. I started going pretty often to the church, at least twice a week, I would say. And eventually I had to move. So I moved to where I am today, and I found a branch of the church, and I kept going to that church. However, a few times after I started going to that same church here, they started to change the way that they did the sermons. And so instead of it being, the local pastor, they would have the international pastor always on a screen. And I just thought, like, oh, this doesn't really make any more sense, because I didn't want to leave my house to go watch a screen. So I got really frustrated at that point. And I was just very much struggling. I didn't want to make the move to where I am today. I was really, really upset that I had to make that decision. And it was an international move. And when I was in the airport on my way here, I was having a really difficult situation happen to me at the airport, and I kept seeing these missionaries walking around, and it just caught my attention, because I think because I was so I was on this journey, looking for a new religion. I was recently started going to that church. I was just very attuned to seeing, different religions and the presence of different religions. So I noticed the missionaries, and then when I went to sit down to eat dinner, I saw that they sat down next to me, and it got me really curious. I really wanted to talk to them, but I didn't really know what I would say or what I would ask or what I would do. So I left it. And then when I got here and I started going to that church that I mentioned, that they started to put up like the pastor on the screen instead of having a local pastor do the sermon, I was walking back to the subway station. And as I was walking to the subway station, I saw a couple missionaries cross my path, and I thought, okay, that's strange. And another day, I think the following week, or a couple weeks after that, I was running late for church, and I decided that I was going to take an Uber. And when the Uber took me, I usually would get off the subway, or I would get off the subway and I would go on one direction to the church. And I realized that when I came by Uber, that we passed by the Mormon temple, which was on the opposite side of the subway, which is why I had seen those Mormon missionaries. And I I thought, okay, this is the same temple that my friend from high school had shown me. So it just really made me curious to go see it. And I saw that they had a visitor center. So I thought, okay, I'll keep that in mind. I had gone to church, and on my way back, I stopped by, but I saw that it was closed on Sundays. They opened a little bit later. So I thought, okay, I'll just kind of leave that for later, and maybe I'll come back another day. So I think I ended up going back maybe 2 weeks after that. I went to the visitor center, and I started talking to one of the sisters at the visitor center, and she was telling me all of these different things, and all of this just all of the knowledge that I had acquired from all of these different religions that I had been researching and trying to participate in, from New Age to the Christianity, and to just everything aligned. And something curious too was that I think maybe a few weeks before I went to the visitor center, I had been looking for some representation of Jesus Christ that I could put in my house. If I ever really wanted to pray, that I would have something visually to focus on. And so I stopped by this bookstore, and I was looking for a specific book, and this is not religious, but I was looking for a specific book. And when I came in, I realized that it was a Christian, or actually a Catholic bookstore. So they had a bunch of figures, and I was expecting something like seeing Jesus, like speaking to his apostles or something. I wanted something, showing him preaching or something of the sort. But all they had were the crucifixes, and I thought, oh, it's so harsh, and I really did not want to have that representation of Jesus Christ on my walls or in my house. And so when I got to the visitor center and I saw the figure of Jesus Christ that, is representative of the LDS church, I was floored. I was absolutely floored because it was the exact same figure representing Jesus Christ that I had been looking for. I could not believe my eyes when I saw that figure of Jesus Christ. And it was massive. It was huge. And I couldn't believe, all of these little, like what felt were like little breadcrumbs that were being left along the way for me to, get to know the church. And I had tried for a little while to research a little bit. I think between those 2 weeks when I saw the visitor center and I actually decided to go, I had been researching, but all of the information seemed really off. There seemed to be a lot of, I guess, like exaggerated stories, and I really wasn't sure what made sense. And so I decided to go to the source and figure it out for myself. And it was the best thing I did. I I decided that, they told me that they were going to have some missionaries um, get in touch with me and that I could go to church service. And that surprised me also because I had been under this impression since that schoolmate of mine had told me that I wasn't able to go into the temple. I just assumed that the temple was the church and the church was the temple, that they were the same thing, and that I wasn't allowed to go ever into their church/temple. So when she told me that I was able to go to the church service, I was really intrigued. And from the moment that I think I went to the visitor center until I was baptized, it was, I think, less than a month. And it was just a whirlwind of joy. And I feel like it's just been such a rewarding experience. The reason that I called this channel Coffee for a Dream is because coffee was the one thing that I was really pained about giving up, because it's been in my life for so long, and I just didn't think I could do the day without my cup of coffee. And so I thought, well, you know what? If I'm going to give it up, then I'll consider that I'm giving up coffee for a dream, for this dream of belonging, for this dream of having a community, for this dream of really connecting with God and, something beyond what we see and what we can touch and what we can, experience through our five senses here on earth. And since I got baptized, which has been a week today, I finally started to see the effects of not drinking coffee. And it's kind of ironic, I guess, because my whole life, I've just had such a difficult time getting out of bed. I have a really hard time getting out of bed. And since I've stopped drinking coffee for the past 3 or 4 days, when my body has just woken me up naturally and I actually feel rested, which has never, ever happened for me in my life. And so I think, maybe coffee was affecting me a little bit differently, and I just never gave myself time to figure out how, because it was a constant presence in my life. So I really just wanted to share my testimony. I wanted to give some insights on what my journey has been like, if there's anyone that's really curious to know more about the church and is looking for that sense of community, that sense of, this is a really just a beautiful expression of what God wants for us on this earth. And the Mormon church does everything so beautifully and in such a detailed manner that it's hard to imagine that they could be leading anyone astray. So that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it and have a wonderful day.